All right, I'm going to show you how to do a nice overlay on an image. A lot of websites have a lot of interactivity to them, and you might think you need JavaScript to do that, but you can do it with pure CSS. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to try to take this text that's down here, and I'm going to move it over the box. And the idea is that every time you hold a mouse over that image, I want the text to sort of show up where the flower is magically, so to speak. All right, so okay, so if we take a look at my HTML, make it a little bit bigger, easier to read here. So you will see that I have a div which has my blurb in it, and I have an image. Let's make sure I can make a CSS selector that works for the blurb. We'll turn the color gray. And you can see I made a mistake. That should be class equals blurb. Always good to test your selectors. Perfect. So that works correctly now. In order to put this text on top of that text, I'm going to have to use absolute positioning. Anytime we're absolute positioning two elements with respect to one another, we're going to want to put them inside of another element. So what I'm going to do is add a wrapper div on the outside here. And you'll see that doesn't actually change the display of my code at all so far. Style equals, oops, not style, sorry, class equals, we'll call this pop-up wrapper. You could call it something else if that made sense to you. Let's make sure that I can style that. So again, I'll turn that background color blue. Beautiful, and we see that my pop-up wrapper in fact works. Lovely. Now the key thing to do with your wrapper is to set position absolute, and position relative. And what position relative does is simply says put this where you'd normally put it. But because it's relative, any of its children that we position absolutely now will be positioned with respect to that box. So for example, if I had some other stuff up top, now the absolute positioning of the children is going to not care about those. It's only going to care about this blue box. That's very nice because now I can start to be very specific. So let's say that the pop-up wrapper image, I always want to be exactly 300 pixels tall. Now in this case it already is, but I'll just put that in there. Maybe 300 pixels wide. Lovely. Now I can think about this in terms of a grid. So this is 300. This is 300. And I can think about where do I want to put the text. So let's suppose that I want the text to show up on the top here. I'm going to want to position it with respect to 0, 0. If, on the other hand, I wanted the text to show up on the bottom here, I might measure here. I might say, okay, if this whole thing is 300, this maybe is 175. So I can position it there. So let me show you how that works. I'm going to go back into my CSS. I'm going to take that blurb class blurb, position absolute. Now I can put it exactly where I want it. Top 175 pixels. Hey, my guess was pretty good if you look at the red box there. Now it goes on top of that. Now we want the width to be precisely 300 pixels. And maybe the absolute has on it a background so that it's viewable. Color white. Or maybe we make it whatever you might do. So let's go ahead with white. You might make it see-through. We'll give it an opacity so that the thing shows up. Beautiful. So there it is. Now my blurb is positioned with respect to my flower. that's the first step, is making sure I can put it where I want. And notice, because I use that relative positioning, if I move these around, the blurb moves around. Watch what happens if I take relative out. Now, the blurb always is positioned with respect to the top of the screen. So it would work just fine here, but the minute I put the paragraphs in, it gets messed up. That's why it's so important to have a wrapper, and that wrapper needs position relative. Beautiful. Now, the last thing is really the simplest, and that's making a little pop-up magic happen. What we're going to do is take the thing we want to be a pop-up, which in this case is the blurb, and we're going to say the blurb is not displayed, display none. What did I do wrong? Blurb. All right, so we're going to say the blurb is display none. Now it disappears. Now we're going to say, we're going to use a parent wrappers. So the pop-up wrapper, we're going to use its hover property. So pop-up wrapper hover. That says when we're hovering over the pop-up wrapper. Let me show you how that works. For example, I could just say make it red when we hover, and by default, now it turns red when we hover. If you're on a touch device, usually clicking will activate that. So that's, but we're going to say now it's child. So if the .blurb child of a hovered over pop-up wrapper is there, then we're going to display block. And watch this. There it goes. So that is pretty handy, isn't it? So now we have a little pop-up that goes right where we want it. We can do all the CSS conditioning of that we want. One kind of fun trick is to make the whole thing into a circle in the center. Oops. In general, when you're doing your CSS tweaking, it's a good idea to just not hide it so that you can see what you're doing. Okay, so let's say that I want some padding on that. I can add some padding here. I recommend hiding the display none or commenting that out while you're editing your look so you can see what you're doing. One thing that's confusing, the CSS box model, remember it's the whole box is going to be content plus padding plus margin. So if I make the padding 40 pixels, that's adding 40 pixels on each side, which means my width now is going to be 300 minus 40, or 220 pixels. If I did height as well, let's see, my whole height of the box is 300, or let's say 300 pixels minus 175 is 125, minus 80 is 45 pixels. Did I get that right? Apparently I did not. It may just be that 45 is too few. Oh yeah, 45. Yeah, you see how the white goes right to there. Now in that case, my text doesn't actually fit there, so I might move this up, move it up by 50. Now I can add 50 to here, and there we go. So you have to be careful with your padding values. Get everything just the way you want it. If I wanted this right in the middle, you can again keep moving it around. You can just sit there and move it by hand, but you can also calculate exactly where you want it to be. You also, if I don't put in a height value, it'll just take up whatever value it takes up. Lots of ways to do this. If I want to make it a circle, I'm going to use the old border radius 50% trick. That's kind of fun. I would have to make the width and the height the same if I wanted it to be a perfect circle. There it is. Now it's a perfect circle. And again, I can place it wherever I want. So that's a quick way. If I uncomment this, I now have a pop-upable blurb that I can place exactly where I want. And I can make as many of them as I want by just copying and pasting this wrapper. And they all work. Great. I hope this has been helpful.